Welcome to PillowTalk Dreams, where every night becomes a story and every story leads you to peace. If you love calm voices, gentle journeys, and stories that help you drift into dreams, then don't forget to subscribe and let your nights be a little softer. Now close your eyes and let the story begin. A snowy night in Paris, Chapter 1. The quiet snowfall Paris had gone quiet. The usual hum of the city, the laughter from the cafes, the distant sound of traffic along the Seine, the clinking of glasses and hurried footsteps had been muffled beneath a curtain of white. Snow fell steadily, tenderly, as though the sky itself wished to hush the world for a little while. Street lamps glowed like golden halos, their light scattering through the falling flakes and painting the cobblestones in a soft, dreamlike shimmer. Lucien Marchand walked alone. His coat collar was turned up against the cold, and a wool scarf, once red, now faded to rose, was wrapped tightly around his neck. He carried a small sketchbook beneath his arm, though he hadn't drawn anything in days. The city that once inspired him now seemed to mock him with its beauty. Every corner, every reflection on wet stone, reminded him of a painting he could no longer create. The snow gathered on his shoulders as he passed the silent shopfronts of Rue Saint-André-des-Arts. He could hear the faint sound of a piano somewhere, perhaps from a nearby apartment. A slow, melancholic melody that drifted through the cold air like a forgotten memory. It stirred something in him, something he couldn't name. He stopped beneath an old lamppost, watching the river move sluggishly beneath the Pont Neuf. Even the Seine looked subdued tonight, its dark surface flecked with snow. He pulled out his sketchbook. The paper was rough beneath his gloves. He began to draw quick, uncertain lines, the outline of the bridge, the glow of the lamps, the faint silhouette of Notre Dame in the distance. But his hand faltered. He stopped and stared at the page. The lines were lifeless. The magic was gone. Maybe beauty doesn't want to be captured tonight, he muttered, the vapor of his breath vanishing into the cold. A gust of wind blew snow into his face, forcing him to turn away. The cold bit through his coat, urging him toward warmth. He glanced across the street and noticed a small cafe, its windows glowing amber, condensation blurring the inside world into an impressionist painting of light and motion. He hesitated, then crossed the street, boots crunching through fresh snow. The cafe was called Le Ciel Bleu. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered, bringing with him a flurry of snowflakes. The warmth hit him like an embrace. The smell of coffee, cocoa, and freshly baked bread filled the air. Only a few people were inside. An elderly couple whispering near the window, a waiter polishing glasses behind the counter, and a woman sitting alone at the piano in the corner. Lucien paused. The woman was playing the same melody he'd heard outside. Her fingers moved gently over the keys, her eyes half closed, lost in the sound. Her hair, chestnut brown with traces of gold where the light touched it, fell loosely around her face. She was dressed simply, in a wool coat and gloves she hadn't yet removed, as if she had only stopped in to escape the snow. Lucien took a seat near the window, though his eyes kept drifting back to her. He ordered a coffee, removed his gloves, and tried to warm his hands on the cup. But the warmth didn't seem to reach him, not until she stopped playing. Her final note lingered in the air like a sigh. The waiter clapped softly from behind the counter. She smiled politely and closed the piano lid. When she looked up, her eyes, clear, gray-blue like the Seine in winter, met Lucien's for a fleeting moment. Something in that glance made the world slow. She smiled, just barely. Lucien looked away, pretending to sip his coffee. Minutes passed. The snow outside grew heavier, pressing against the windows like a curtain of white. The elderly couple left, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and tobacco. The waiter disappeared into the back. Soon, the cafe felt like a quiet dream with only two souls inside. The woman moved to a nearby table, placing her gloves beside a steaming cup of tea. She glanced toward him again. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly, her voice carrying across the quiet room. Lucian looked up. "The snow," she nodded. "Paris feels different when it snows, as if it finally decides to rest." He smiled faintly. "You make it sound like the city has a soul." She tilted her head, thinking, maybe it does. Maybe that's why it breaks hearts so easily. He chuckled under his breath. "You speak like a poet." "Only when it snows," she said, smiling. He hesitated, then rose and walked toward her table. "Do you mind if I join you?" "Please," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. He sat. The candle between them flickered, reflecting in her eyes. "I'm Lucian," he said after a moment. "Elise." Her name felt like music, soft, lilting, familiar somehow. They spoke quietly, as though afraid to disturb the stillness around them. She told him she was a pianist, or at least she used to be. The orchestra she played with had canceled their winter tour because of the storm, and she was stranded in Paris for the night. "And you?" she asked. "You look like someone who sees stories in everything." Lucian smiled. "I used to paint them, but lately the stories stopped coming." She studied him for a long moment. "Maybe you're looking too hard. Sometimes beauty finds you when you stop searching." He wanted to tell her that she might be right, that perhaps beauty had found him already, sitting across a candle-lit table in a quiet Paris cafe while snow buried the world outside. But he said nothing. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, the snow fell thicker, swallowing the street lamps one by one. Elise leaned back, watching the flakes drift down. "It feels like the world is pausing," she whispered. Lucian followed her gaze. The glass fogged with their breath, blurring the outside world into watercolor shapes, gold, white, and silver gray. In that moment, he felt something stir inside him again. A warmth, fragile and new, like the first brushstroke on a blank canvas. And as the night deepened and the snow continued to fall, Lucian Marchand realized that some stories don't begin with thunder or passion or fate. Some begin quietly, with two strangers and a snowy night in Paris. Chapter 2. Two strangers. One night the snow outside had turned heavier, brushing softly against the cafe windows like a whispered lullaby. The city was vanishing under its touch, rooftops, bridges, and narrow streets becoming pale sketches of themselves. Inside, Lucille blew. Only the low hum of the heater and the faint clinking of cups filled the air. Lucian and Elise sat across from each other, their candle slowly burning lower, its flame trembling in the draft. Neither seemed in a hurry to leave. "You paint," Elise said, her voice gentle. "Tell me about that." Lucian smiled faintly, tracing the rim of his cup. "I used to. I haven't touched a canvas in weeks. Nothing I draw feels alive anymore." Elise tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He looked at his hands, stained faintly with old pigment, traces of blue and sienna beneath his nails. "It's strange. I walk through Paris, I see beauty everywhere. The river at dusk, the light on old stones, people laughing in the street, but when I try to paint it, the feeling disappears. It's like chasing a ghost." She was quiet for a moment, eyes fixed on him. "Maybe you're not supposed to capture it," she said softly. "Maybe you're meant to feel it." He looked up, caught by the calm certainty in her tone. "Do you always sound like you've lived 100 lives?" She smiled. "Music teaches you things. It's a language without words. You learn to listen, even to silence." Lucian leaned back, watching her. The cafe's dim light painted soft shadows across her face. There was a calmness about her, not sadness exactly, but the kind of that follows it. "Why were you playing?" he asked. That song, it felt familiar somehow. Eliza's gaze drifted toward the piano in the corner. "It's something I wrote years ago for my mother. She used to say it sounded like snowfall." "It does," Lucian said quietly. "It sounded like the night outside." She smiled at that, not brightly, but with something deeper, like gratitude. For a while, they didn't speak. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was soft, filled with the rhythm of falling snow and the faint hiss of the espresso machine. When the waiter returned to ask if they needed anything more, Elise shook her head and looked out the window. "It's still coming down," she murmured. "I should probably wait until it slows." "Where were you going?" Lucian asked. She hesitated. "A small hotel near Montmartre. I was supposed to stay there before the train got canceled." "That's across the river," he said. "It's a long walk in this weather." "I'll manage," he smiled gently. "You don't strike me as the type who likes to manage." She laughed, a sound so soft it seemed to melt into the air. "You think I look fragile? I think you look like someone who carries more weight than she admits." That made her pause. She looked at him again, differently this time, as though he had seen through the layers she'd carefully kept in place. "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes weight keeps you grounded." Lucian nodded slowly. "Or it keeps you from flying." Her lips parted slightly, as if to reply, but she said nothing. The silence stretched again, deeper this time, almost charged. Outside, a taxi tried to make its way down the street, tires slipping in the snow. The driver gave up, parking beneath a lamp and turning off his headlights. The city was surrendering to the storm. Elise drew shapes on the fogged window with her fingertip, small circles, lines, a few random swirls. "I love nights like this," she said suddenly. "When the world slows down, it feels like time stops watching you." Lucian smiled. "You sound like an artist." "I'm a musician," she corrected. "We steal time just differently." He chuckled softly. "So do painters. We try to hold it still forever." Their eyes met again. Something about the way she looked at him, quiet, searching, made his chest tight. It wasn't the look of a stranger anymore. After a while, Elise leaned forward. "Can I see something you've painted?" Lucian hesitated, then pulled his sketchbook from his coat pocket. "They're just sketches," he said, flipping through pages filled with half-finished drawings, rooftops, bridges, blurred outlines of people passing by. The last page was a rough sketch of the cafe window, drawn only minutes ago, with a faint shape of a woman at the piano. Elise's eyes softened. "That's me," he smiled faintly. "I didn't mean to draw you. My hand just moved." She ran her fingers lightly over the paper, careful not to smudge the pencil lines. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "even if you don't think so." He studied her face, the way she looked at the sketch, the tenderness in her expression. For the first time in weeks, he felt something like pride flicker in his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. They sat together as the candle burned lower. The clock ticked toward midnight. Snow kept falling, gentler now, settling into silence. Finally, Elise looked out the window again. "It's late," she murmured. Lucian followed her gaze. The streets were deserted, blanketed in white. "You shouldn't walk alone. Let me at least take you part of the way." She hesitated, considering him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." He paid for their drinks, and together they stepped out into the snow. The cold air hit their faces, crisp and clean, carrying the faint smell of the river. Paris lay before them, quiet, glimmering, endless. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly on the empty street. Elise pulled her scarf tighter. Lucian offered his arm without a word. She took it, her hand light against his sleeve. Above them, the snow continued to fall, delicate, patient, timeless. And as they walked toward the bridge, the city disappeared behind them, leaving only two shadows moving slowly through a world made of white and silence. Chapter 3. The forgotten bridge. The streets were hushed beneath the thick veil of snow. Every sound seemed softened, distant, the echo of their footsteps, the faint whisper of wind curling through alleyways, the slow rhythm of the Seine moving beneath the bridges. Lucian and Elise walked side by side, their breaths forming small clouds in the frozen air. The world felt emptied of everyone but them. Street lamps flickered faintly along Rue Dauphine, casting golden circles of light that melted into the white fog. The snow had turned the familiar city into something dreamlike, a painting half-finished, suspended between night and dawn. Elise kept close to Lucian, her gloved hand occasionally brushing his arm. "I don't think I've ever seen Paris this quiet," she whispered. Lucian smiled faintly. "It happens only when it snows this hard. The city hides itself. Maybe it just wants to be alone for a while." He glanced at her. "And what about you? Do you like being alone?" She looked ahead, her eyes tracing the soft line of the Seine through the mist. "Sometimes. I travel a lot. I've gotten used to hotel rooms, train stations, unfamiliar walls. But every now and then," she hesitated, her voice almost a whisper, "I wish someone was waiting when I came back." Lucian nodded slowly. "I understand that." They reached the end of the street, where the bridge arched over the river like an ancient stone ribbon. The Pont Neuf was nearly deserted, its statues and railings wearing crowns of snow. The water below moved in slow ripples, dark and reflective, like ink spreading on parchment. Lucian stopped midway across. "This bridge," he said quietly, "has seen everything: love, loss, revolutions, celebrations. I always wonder how much it remembers." Elise turned toward him, smiling softly. "Do you believe places remember?" "I do," he said. "I think they hold onto echoes. The laughter, the footsteps, even the things we try to forget." She leaned on the railing, her breath turning to mist. "Then maybe it remembers us now." Lucian looked at her, her hair dusted with snow, her eyes reflecting the golden lamplight, and for a moment he couldn't speak. There was something timeless about her, something that belonged to the city itself. He reached into his coat and pulled out his sketchbook. "May I?" She looked surprised. "You want to draw me here?" He nodded. "Before the snow changes." Elise hesitated, then smiled. "All right, but only if you promise not to make me look too serious." He chuckled. "I can't promise that." She stood near the railing, gazing out over the river as he began to draw. His pencil moved quickly, guided not by thought but by instinct. The curve of her scarf, the tilt of her chin, the soft light caught in her hair, every line seemed alive. The city around them disappeared. There was only her and the sound of graphite brushing paper. After a few minutes, he stopped and exhaled. "Done." She walked over, brushing the snow from her coat. "Can I see?" He turned the sketchbook toward her. It was simple, unfinished, but her likeness was there, surrounded by a halo of falling snow and the faint outline of the bridge behind her. Elise stared at it in silence. "It feels real," she murmured, "like the air around us." Lucian looked down at the drawing. "You gave it that. I just followed what was already there." She looked at him then, her expression soft. "You're better than you think, Lucian." He smiled faintly. "Maybe tonight helped." They continued walking, their footsteps tracing a slow path toward the far end of the bridge. The snowlight shimmered across the water, and in the distance, Notre Dame rose like a shadowed guardian, its towers faint beneath the fog. "Do you ever wonder," Elise asked suddenly, "why some moments feel like they'll stay forever?" Lucian thought for a moment. "Because they remind us we're alive," she nodded slowly. "Or because they happen only once." He glanced at her, hearing something fragile in her voice, a quiet ache beneath the calm. "What will you do tomorrow? Try to get on another train, she said, if the weather allows. And if it doesn't, she smiled, looking down. Then I suppose I'll find another cafe to get stranded in. He laughed softly, and for the first time that night it didn't sound hollow. When they reached the far end of the bridge, they stopped beneath a street lamp. Snow gathered on their shoulders, on her hair, on the pages of his sketchbook. The world around them felt like a painting, light, silence, and the slow rhythm of breath. "Thank you for walking with me," Elise said, her tone almost shy. "Thank you for the music," he replied. "I think it brought me back to myself." She looked at him then, really looked, and the space between them seemed to vanish. Her eyes, silver in the lamplight, held a warmth he hadn't felt in years. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she smiled softly. "It's getting colder. Maybe we should keep walking." He nodded, though part of him wished the bridge could stretch on forever. As they left the Pont Neuf behind, the snow fell thicker, veiling the city once more. But Lucien didn't feel lost anymore. The emptiness he had carried for so long now had shape, sound, and warmth, all of it belonging to this quiet woman walking beside him through the snow. And though he didn't yet know it, this night, this single, snowy night in Paris, would stay with him for the rest of his life. Chapter 4. Memories in the snow. They left the bridge behind, following a narrow street that wound along the riverbank. The snow had softened everything, the edges of the cobblestones, the rooftops, the statues, even the sharp corners of memory. It was as if Paris herself was trying to forget for a while. Lucien walked slightly ahead, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, the sketchbook still under his arm. Elise followed, her boots leaving delicate prints beside his. The only sound between them was the soft crush of snow beneath their steps and the distant chime of a church bell marking midnight. When they turned a corner, the street opened onto a small square. A frozen fountain stood in the center, its stone figures draped in ice. The lamplight shimmered on its surface, and a few snowflakes fell lazily through the still air. Lucien stopped. "Do you want to rest for a moment?" Elise nodded. They sat together on a bench, their breath misting the cold air. For a while, they said nothing. The silence between them felt intimate, like an old song playing softly in another room. Elise traced a finger along the bench's edge, watching the snow cling to her glove. "It's strange," she said finally, "how a city can feel like a memory you haven't lived yet." Lucien looked at her, curious. "What do you mean?" "I've been here so many times," she said, "but tonight feels different, familiar in a way I can't explain, as if I'm remembering something that hasn't happened yet." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what déjà vu really is, meeting a moment that was waiting for you." Her eyes lifted to his. "Do you believe in that, moments waiting for us?" "I used to," he said, "before I stopped believing in much of anything." She studied him quietly. "What happened?" Lucien leaned back, looking up at the falling snow. "My father was a painter too. He taught me everything I know about light, color, patience. He used to say every painting is a conversation between the heart and the world." Elise smiled gently. "That's beautiful." "He died 5 years ago," Lucien continued. "After that I tried to keep painting, but every canvas felt heavier. It was like painting with silence." Elise's expression softened. "I'm sorry," he nodded. "He wanted me to have my first exhibition by now. I even rented a tiny studio in Montparnasse. But every time I stand before the easel, I see his reflection instead of mine." She was quiet for a long time. Then softly she said, "Grief doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. Sometimes it turns into music or paint or the sound of snow falling." Lucien looked at her, surprised. "You speak like you've known loss too." Her lips curved into a sad smile. "I have." He didn't press her, but after a moment she began to speak. "I grew up in Lyon," she said. My mother was a violinist, my father a teacher. We didn't have much, but there was always music in the house. My mother used to play in the evenings something soft, usually old waltzes. When she played, the world felt safe. Lucian watched the way her eyes grew distant, reflecting the lamplight. She got sick when I was 16, Elise continued quietly. Cancer. It was slow at first, then faster. The night she died, it was snowing just like this. She paused, her voice catching slightly. That melody I played earlier, it was the last thing she heard. I promised her I'd never stop playing it. But sometimes I can't. Sometimes it hurts too much. Lucian reached out, hesitated, then gently covered her hand with his. You kept your promise, he said softly. Her eyes shimmered, but she smiled. Maybe, or maybe I've been trying to find her again through every note. The wind stirred, sending a swirl of snowflakes dancing around them. For a while they just sat there, hands still joined, watching the snow fall onto the frozen fountain. Lucian spoke quietly. Maybe that's why we create art, to find the people we've lost, or the parts of ourselves we forgot, she whispered. He nodded, feeling the truth of it. The cold no longer bit as sharply. The night felt gentler somehow. After a moment, Elise stood. Come on, she said softly. There's a place I want to show you. He followed her through the winding streets until they reached a narrow alley lined with old apartments. A small boulangerie stood at the corner, closed for the night, its sign swaying gently in the wind. Across from it was a tiny bookshelf, its window half covered in frost. Through the glass, Lucian could make out the shapes of old leather-bound books stacked unevenly, and a single lamp glowing faintly inside. Elise smiled. It's always open, even this late. The owner lives upstairs. I used to come here after rehearsals. He'd let me read until morning. She knocked lightly on the door. After a moment, it creaked open, and the smell of old paper and candle wax spilled into the cold air. The elderly bookseller inside nodded at them with a sleepy smile before disappearing up the stairs. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the comforting scent of history, ink, dust, and memory. Lucian looked around in awe. Shelves reached to the ceiling, every inch crammed with books. A small fire crackled in the hearth, and a single table stood in the middle of the room with two mismatched chairs. Elise brushed snow from her coat and sat down, her eyes soft in the firelight. It's like time stops here, she said. No one rushes, no one expects anything, you just exist. Lucian sat across from her. That sounds perfect, she smiled faintly. Maybe that's why I come here when I feel lost. Lucian opened his sketchbook again, flipping to a blank page. Would you mind if I draw this? Go ahead, she said. I'll play something. From a small shelf, she picked up a dusty violin that had clearly been left behind long ago. She tuned it carefully, her movements sure and delicate. Then she began to play soft, haunting notes that drifted through the room like falling snow. Lucian drew, his pencil gliding across the page in rhythm with her melody. The fire crackled, the snow fell outside, and the city of Paris seemed to fade into the distance. When she finished, the silence that followed felt sacred. Lucian looked at her and whispered, You make the night beautiful. Elise met his gaze, her eyes shining in the firelight. Maybe it was beautiful already, she said. We just had to stop long enough to see it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, endless, quiet, eternal. And somewhere between the turning of a page and the final note of a song, two lonely souls began to find warmth again, not from the fire, but from each other.